Welcome back to BBN After Dark. It's been a little while, took a break for the holidays, but we're back and a lot to talk about here as winter training gets underway. Practices started back last week, and obviously will continue until the start of the season. But really excited. We always say this is where players move mountains, and if you look back at some of the BBNs that we did last year during this time, a lot can change between November, December, and then the start of the season. This is when players kind of break out and we see those transformations. So today we're going to talk a lot about the position battles. And in some cases, we've got positions with no clear front runner for the job. And then in other cases, we've got maybe a little bit of a crowded position where a team has a guy at a position, but you've got a big up and coming prospect who's looking to get into the lineup, and how does that shake out? So we're going to talk about a lot of different teams today, but I do want to go ahead and start with 14U Floyd. And the reason I want to start with this team is because, in my opinion, with the whole aspect of a couple guys who are going to be in their high school seasons, I think it makes this team's positional depth chart very, very interesting for the spring. So KJ, not on the show today, so me and Bernie here are going to break it down. And Bernie, let's go ahead and look at this 14U Floyd team, and let's start with the three big names who are going to be presumably on their high school team to start the season, that being Lucas Wilburn, Jack Kester, and Lucas Velchek. And let's start with first base. Lucas Wilburn played, I would say, 90% of the innings of this past season at first base. The only time he wasn't there was when he was pitching. So I think this is a spot where, clearly for the 6 to 8 weeks that Wilburn is gone, somebody's got to step up in this position. And Bernie, obviously, I'm the head of this age, so I maybe have a little more insight than most people, but I do want to get your thoughts first, a little bit more of a general perspective here. What do you think about the first base situation for 14U Floyd to open the spring?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of different guys that are going to have an opportunity to benefit from this high school season with Lucas Wilburn being gone. Even just looking at first base, right? Trevor Anderson can play there. I know Jacob Vallette's played very well in the Winter League. He could have a shot there. But then even if you move Parker over to first, then you're looking for a new third baseman, and like that just moves all positions around. So a lot of different guys will have opportunities, even if it's not directly at first. Guys will have opportunities indirectly to play other positions because maybe if Parker's moved over there for a little bit.
Yeah, and one big name that I think arguably you could say is the favorite to play first base would maybe be Trevor Anderson. Trevor was a huge story for the Bears in the middle of the summer when he really got his come up. Started the season last year on Kreitler, got moved up to Bell, quickly moved up to Floyd, and then for about 2 months, he was a top 5 hitter on Floyd. June and July, I would say, was really Trevor's prime this season. And then in the fall, when he kind of was playing football and missing a little bit more, he kind of tapered off. But obviously in the spring, he's all baseball. And I do think with Trevor Anderson, with what he did in the 2-3 months that he was on that top team, he was really, really good. Here are his numbers. This is combined for all Bell, Kreitler, and Floyd, but hit 432 last season, had an OPS plus of 123 on all three teams. He was very, very good. Double-digit doubles, 51 hits on the season. I mean, this guy was a very, very good hitter. And when you look at first base, obviously, I think it's a little bit of an offensive position. Bernie, what do you think about Trevor Anderson? And obviously, I feel like most of the season he was in a role player role. When he did get starts, it was typically at the extra hitter position at EH. What do you think about Trevor, Bernie, in terms of, do you think defensively he could hang at the first base position for the 14 Floyd team?
Yeah, I think that I know me, you, and KJ have talked before that, first base, it's a hard position to be really good at, but it's an easy position to learn just because of how many reps you get there. So, even if it's not day one, I think, a couple weeks into the season, he'll really get the hang of it. I think he'll be fine defensively. He's already a decent third baseman. It's not going to be a hard transfer, I don't think, for him. And then, like I think everyone knows, with the bat, massive upside bat has a lot of power. We've seen it last season. I think that, if he can figure out defensively, I think that he can earn a spot to be in this line not only for the spring, but down the stretch of the summer season.
Yeah, and I do want to touch on a couple of names you mentioned, Bernie. Jacob Villette, he has been in a Bear for a long time. He's been between the top and second team over the last 2 years or so. And last year, he had a very solid offensive season. Looking at his numbers, hit 371 over the course of the season, mostly on that Bell team. Had an OPS plus over 100, so he was one of the better hitters on that team, and an OBP of 533. So Jacob, I think the big thing for him is how much power is he going to hit for? And then obviously defensively, I would argue that of the guys, Trevor, Jacob Villette, and a guy I want to talk about in Jordan Armbruster, of those three guys, Jacob is probably the best defensively, just strictly on the defensive side. And I do think that if he can prove, whether it be in BWL or even in free swing, if he can prove to up his power potential a little bit, put on maybe 15 pounds of muscle, I think Jacob certainly could be a very solid option for that first base position. And then one more guy, Johnny Armbruster, who, um, you know, uh, obviously we haven't got a chance to talk about this since we've been off the air, but John Armbruster, 3 consecutive seasons, his extra base hit rate has increased and his strikeout rate has gone down. And those are two things that you really like to see as a guy starting to develop. So Johnny A, last season, his extra base hit percentage up to 8%. I believe his first season Bears had 0 extra base hits, moved up to around 3% last year, and now 8% this past season. End of the season with 9 doubles. If that increase jumps again, and maybe he adds a homer or two to that aspect, I think Johnny A could be a very interesting player here. Bernie, what do you about John Armbruster? What do you think about him going into this 2024 season, whether it be on Floyd or Bell? Give me your thoughts on John Armbruster.
Yeah, Johnny's a guy that's been here for a little bit now. This guy has worked very hard this offseason. I see him in free swing, pitching. Basically anything he can be at, he's at. He's working hard. He's grinding. And look, last season I think he was, I'm not gonna say the best hitter on Bell, but he was one of Jackson's top guys there. He counted on a lot of big spots by the middle of the order. And I think that if he's on Floyd, I think that he will be a nice role player for them to start the year. But if he's back on Bell, I think he will continue to grow and continue to be one of the best hitters on that squad.
Yeah, I'm excited to see if he can take another step forward. And then one more situation that you mentioned, Bernie, Parker Ells could potentially move over to first base. And that would open up opportunities for a guy like Evan Lancaster to play third. Josiah Leaker maybe could slide in at third. And then Trevor, obviously. Trevor is a natural third baseman, so he could potentially pick up that third base position. But for me, at least, the only reason I would want to move Parker to first is if I'm going to keep him there all season. I don't really like the idea of making Parker play out of position for 6 to 8 weeks and then just moving him back to third when Lucas gets back. I think if I am going to move Parker to first, I'm going to consider moving Lucas Wilburn maybe to the outfield and then just saying, Parker, you're my first baseman. So that's the one thing there. I do think Parker is probably the most capable first baseman that we mentioned, but it's just, do you want to sacrifice, that long term for that short term? I think is the thing there. Moving into the outfield for this team, obviously a very strong outfield. Look, when you look at last year with Lucas Velchek, Aaron Noll, Jack Kester, those three were very, very dominant down the stretch of the fall, and really there was none of those three guys were getting subbed out very often. They all started almost every game, the three of them in the outfield. So I think this outfield is very, very solid. But when you look at Velchek and Kester, two of those guys being out early in the season with their high school team, I think it opens up a lot of different combinations at left and right field. Bernie, I'll list a couple guys here, and then I just want to get your thoughts. Obviously, you've got guys who are veterans who can play the outfield, like Quinn Steinbeck, like Logan Payne. And then you've got some guys who are a little bit more of, were bench guys last year, were maybe Bell guys last year, guys like Mason Gebhardt, guys like, guys who could come up from Bell, like a Reed Rustio for potential, Carlos Leon for potential. And then you've got these big high ceiling guys like a Braden Miller, like, even a guy who's been around for a while, like a Duron Phillips. You got a lot of different options here. Bernie, I think this outfield is definitely up for grabs. What do you think, Bernie, in terms of the outfield situation for 14U Floyd early in the season?
Yeah, I think this team's going to have opportunity I think you're going to lose a little bit defensively with losing Vilcek and Kester. But offensively, Kester and Vilcek are great hitters, but there's some bats that replace them. I mean, Logan Payne, I think, proved for a while last season that, he can hang with anybody at the plate. And even a bat maybe like Joey Burgess, who I know he's going to catch some innings for that team, but maybe he gets full playing time by moving the outfield a little bit. And, that's a bat that I want to see, get consistent at bats every week because I think that the ceiling or the sky's the limit for him. And yeah, I mean, there's a couple Bell guys, Deron Phillips has had a decent offseason so far. There's a lot of different guys that move out there, but there's definitely, a lot of bats that can replace them. Braden Miller, all those guys.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. I think those battles are all going to be won in the offseason. A lot of different guys with chances. I think if you're looking for a most likely scenario, another guy I didn't mention, Joey Haddican, who was very solid down the stretch. But I think that Logan Payne is probably going to be one of those guys out there. I could see Logan Payne just being the everyday left fielder until those guys come back, Velchek and Kester, and then Logan maybe moves back to second, moves back to EH. But I think Logan's going to be in the lineup somewhere. I'm pretty confident saying that. So maybe he sticks and left. And then the right field position, guys you mentioned, Bernie, I think it's a battle between Mason Gebhart, Braden Miller, Joey Burgess if he's not catching. And you see a big battle for that right field position. So a lot of different ways it can go. What's exciting about having 3 or 4 guys compete for a position is whoever wins it is going to be a very, very good player. So I'm excited to see what that looks like in the outfield. And then the last 2 things I want to talk about 14 Floyd. First of all, it's hard to have a catcher battle necessarily because, especially me, I use multiple catchers most weekends. I like to not have any of my catchers catch more than 3 games in a weekend. So Quinn and Joey are both going to catch a lot. But in terms of that guy who's going to be the innings leader at catcher, I think you're looking at a defensive option in Quinn, offensive option in Joey, and then I think it's going to come down to whichever one does the other way better, right? So is Joey going to be a better defender than Quinn is a hitter, or the other way around? I think that's going to kind of decide who gets the majority of the innings there, especially when you're talking about big Sunday games. It's going to be hard to get Joey's bat out of the lineup, but is Quinn's defense going to be too much, too big to overcome? So that'll be the interesting questions there. And then finally, the pitching staff. Belchek and Wilburn were 2 of the biggest innings eaters for this team last season. Obviously, you're looking at Quinn Steinbeck, Evan Lancaster, Mason Geddes, and then outside of that, I think it's a question about who's going to fill the rest of those innings and also who's the Sunday ace. So, Bernie, those 2 questions there. Who do you think is the Sunday ace to open the season? It was Velchek for most of last season. Who do you think is Sunday ace, and who do you think is maybe that 4th starter who could come in and fill innings for this team early in the season?
Yeah, for the Sunday ace, I think that you got to go with Quinn. I know he's a good defensive catcher, right? You want him catching on Sundays, but just how good he was, and he had some crazy run in the middle of last summer where his ERA was under 1 for the majority of the year. Just how he keeps hitters off balance, right? I mean, he does not allow very many runs against any team. So I think he's got to be the guy on Sundays to at least open the year. And then for the 4th guy, throw out some names for me here. Throw me out some names here that could be that 4th guy.
Yeah, I would say the competition, you've got guys who pitched in spot innings last year for 14 Floyd, like a Parker Ells, like a Trevor Anderson. And then you got some big innings eaters who are on the Bell team, like Jacob Villette, like Josiah Leaker. And then you have maybe some potential guys who didn't necessarily pitch much with the top team, but who could maybe get some innings, like maybe a Reed Rustio, like a Dylan Graham. I know Mason Gebhart has shown an interest in pitching. Joey Burgess has shown an interest in pitching. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can go. But Bernie, of those names there, who do you think maybe is the most likely to be that 4th starter?
Yeah, I think he could play different guys based on different scenarios, different teams. But if you're forced me to pick a guy there, Josiah, he's kind of like the high ceiling guy. He throws hard. If he can stay in the zone, he's going to be very, very productive. But so far in Winter League, I've seen Jacob Villette pitch once, and he pitched very well. So, if his bat can come along, maybe a little more power comes along, right? He could be in the middle of the first base conversation and, be in the middle of the 4th starter competition. So, that'd be the option I would pick right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of different guys. Parker had a stretch last season where he looked really, really good. Obviously, has been hit or miss for the last 2 seasons now in terms of his pitching. But for the fourth starter, it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to have a guy who could go out and shove, or you may have to take him out in the first inning, but that's not necessarily a bad fourth starter. But like you said, Bernie, some nice high floor options like Jacob Villette, like Josiah Leaker, who struggled to throw strikes down the stretch, but for the most part was a really good strike thrower. And then you've got like the wild cards, like a Joey Burgess and potentially a Trevor Anderson, who could step up in big innings. So very, very interested to see this 14 Floyd squad. On one hand, obviously playing without Lucas Wilburn, Lucas Velchek, and Jack Kester. You're losing 3 big players there. But on the other hand, it's nice as a coach to get a lot of competition internally to find guys. Obviously, we've told stories before that last year when 15U Floyd went through the same thing, they found guys like Adam Shockley, who may have not made the top team otherwise. Dane Pastrana, who may not have made the top team otherwise if it weren't for those guys in high school ball. So I'm excited to see what happens here in the spring, but a lot of different names here who can win jobs over the next 2-3 months. Let's go ahead and move along here to your team, Bernie. And I would say when you're looking at your roster, Bernie, it's more a case of who's going to be the top guy than necessarily who's in the lineup. Because I think for the most part, we know who your starting 9, 10 guys are going to be to open the season. Maybe we could talk about who's going to make the roster on the end of the bench. But the first thing I want to talk about, Bernie, is the pitching staff. Because to me, what was the make or break thing for this team, whether you went deep into a Sunday or whether you were out first game, was how well the team pitched on the weekend and how deep the pitching staff could get. And I think Owen Lewis has proven he's a consistent, reliable option. Whether he's the ace or the 2 starter, he is going to go out there and give you a chance to win every week. Harrison Blabaum looked like the best pitcher on the team at times, especially in September and October. Then the rest of the pitching staff is a little bit unclear. So, Bernie, what do you think about this 12U Floyd or 12U Birnstill pitching staff when you're looking at top to bottom? Who fills out the rest of that rotation? And what do you think about this Birnstill pitching staff?
Yeah, you're looking at a top 2 at least for right now. Like you said, Owen Lewis has got to be one of those guys. It doesn't matter if Owen's going to have a bad day or a good day; he's going to give us a chance to win. He's never going to lose us a game. Harrison, it got me another guy in that conversation because he looked like the best pitcher on the team at times. And then after that, it's kind of all up for grabs, as you could say. Rudy, Montero Langley, the rookie, has looked very, very promising in terms of pitching. I think he could come out and he could possibly be the guy. A couple weeks into the season. Same thing with Hunter Finley's looking really good in precision pitching. He's definitely going to eat some innings for us. Then other guys like Rowan Damshaw also in precision pitching has looked all right. Connor Kennedy, the guy who ate innings for us last year. There's innings up for grabs, right? There's a lot of different guys that I think are going to be able to chip in. And I think that, I'm feeling pretty good about the pitching staff going on next year.
Yeah, and for me, Bernie, the big thing I think is getting out of those situations where you have to use Owen for 20, 30 pitches on Saturday, and then he's limited on Sunday. I felt like there were several times last year where you needed to use Owen to get a win on Saturday, and then Sunday he can only throw 50 pitches, and all of a sudden you're having to take him out in the third with a close lead and don't really have anybody reliable to go to. I think you don't necessarily need one of those guys, like you said, Burn, to be the ace, because I think Owen or Harrison could be that guy. I think you're just looking to get reliable innings. And in terms of the guys you mentioned, I think there's kind of a spectrum of high floor and high ceiling. I think Rudy is the definition of the high ceiling guy. He could be the ace, if he puts it all together. He could be that kind of guy who takes that jump and all of a sudden is a dominant type arm. Going into this season. And then you've got a guy like Hunter Finley, who, in my opinion, he's going to be the, I don't want to make it sound bad, but like the discount Owen Lewis, where, and this is not a this to Hunter at all. Owen's a top level pitcher. If Hunter can be 80% of Owen Lewis, that's a guy who's going to win a lot of games on Saturday. And he doesn't quite throw as hard as Owen, doesn't quite have the off speed Owen does, but I think he's got enough of that strike throwing ability, that off speed, that, and he doesn't throw slow necessarily, just not as hard as Owen. I think he could be a Saturday guy who is very consistent, wins a lot of games, and puts you in a situation where you don't have to use Owen or Harrison on Saturday. And then you've got other guys, Cale Taylor, who was hit or miss, but at times last year looked very, very solid. Rowan Damschroeder, who sneakily, I thought had a nice, solid pitching season, didn't do it in the volume that you would like, and had, some outings where he went out there and wasn't even close, but I think was solid last year. And then Brody Wilburn, who at times has been very, very solid in the past. So, a lot of solid options, Bernie. I think you're looking at a pitching staff that what it looks like in April may not be what it looks like in September, but I think this is going to be a much improved Birnstill pitching staff from last year, and I think that'll take this team over the top. Let's go ahead and talk about the bench, Bernie, the back end of this team. I think you've got 9 solid starters, and then you've got some guys who are very interesting who could be bench options. When we talk about the ceiling versus floor thing, I think you got a really high floor player in a Garrett Perkins who, Garrett, not a superstar, but not going to hurt you. He's going to go out. He'll make the routine plays. He'll put together good at bats. He'll get on base. He'll run the bases well. And then you got guys who are a little bit more high ceiling, like a Gabe Brown, like a Dowd Ishmael, who are both top 50 prospects. Bernie, when you're looking at the guys, who are kind of on that second team or even who are on the bench last year, who do you see who could potentially make the bench for this team to open the season?
Yeah. Another guy you did not mention that I've been over the moon about so far this winter. He's really impressed me every practice is Tucker Parnell. He's been here for a full year now. He's looked very clean at first base. I know we got Harrison, but if Harrison's pitching right, a bunch of different scenarios I could use Tucker in. And like you said, with Gabe Brown and Dowd, those guys are both. Dowd's been here a little longer, so I think he's a little more polished than maybe Gabe Brown. But both guys, I don't know exactly right now where I put them on defense, but as far as the bats go, neither of those guys would be the worst bat on my team. And then with Garrett, like you said, I love having Garrett on the team just because, Garrett helps the team just different ways, right? He's not a bad defender. He's probably the best base runner I would have on my team if he's on my roster. And he's going to take good at bats. He's going up there. He's being aggressive. He doesn't walk very often. Not saying like he's not going to go up there and swing at balls above his head, but he's very aggressive in the zone, right? Takes the type of bats I like to see. Those 4 guys right there all have a good shot at making the team out of camp to start the season.
Yeah. Tucker, I think I agree, Bernie. I've talked this guy up a lot during practices. I think he's looked really, really good. Obviously, much improved on the defensive side. For me, I think you got to see a little bit more with the bat from him, and I think there's a very good chance he opens the season with that second team. But if he comes out to get hitting, Bernie, I think he's a very solid defensive option. I think there's a lot of different ways that this team could go, and very excited to see how this 12U Birnstill squad lines up for next season, because the team continues to get deeper. Every year we've gotten a little bit deeper at that age, and I think you got 9 solid starters. I think you've got a potential to have a very good pitching staff, and I think this team will look very good. We'll continue to check in on them as winter training camp goes on. But I want to go ahead and talk about 11U Floyd. This team obviously found getting their feet wet a little bit in the tournament landscape last fall, grinding every single weekend, and started to emerge, some guys who are going to be big players for this team going forward. And then, of course, there's still some opportunities for, guys to compete for jobs. I know there's several players on the second level 11U team that I personally like. I've got a chance to start working with 11U at practice a little bit. So I think this team definitely up for grabs. And I want to go ahead, Bernie, and start with the infield. And I think we kind of know who's in contention to play the infield, but I think it's not at all certain where guys are going to play. I don't think it's certain what combination of 4 guys there's going to be. Obviously, you're going to switch things up based on who's pitching, but I think there's a lot of different guys who look really good. I'll go ahead and start here with, obviously Carson Griffith, Owen Dobrinsky, I think are going to be there somewhere. Are they at third and short? Are they at short and second? Are they at third and second? We don't really know. Carson Griffith may catch a lot, so where does that put the rest of the infield? And then you've got guys like Landon Hines, who certainly had a very solid season last year. I think he surprised me definitely with how well he played through the entirety of the season. You've got Cooper Woolen, who has impressed me lately. He's been very solid. I'm not all too familiar with his at-bats, but I know at practice he's been impressing me with how solid he is defensively. And then you've got guys on the second team like the Radfords, who Bentley especially has been one of my off-season winners so far. I can't say enough good things about Bentley Radford and what we've seen from him so far this offseason. So, Bernie, what do you think about this 11U Floyd infield? I don't know if there's any guys I missed there. Obviously, we're mostly talking about second, short, and third, not necessarily first base. So second, short, and third, Bernie, what do you see with this 11U Floyd infield, and what do you think it looks like in April?
Yeah. I think that, Weed and Hayline probably is going to open the day at first base if I had to take a good guess. I know Max playing there a lot of this winter. But other than that, I think it's completely up in the air. I mean, honestly, Owen Dobrinsky, I don't think you left anyone off. Owen Dobrinsky, Carson Griffith, Bentley Radford, and Cooper Woolen. I think those are the four guys that are really competing for those three spots. And they all have their different strengths. I think that Griffith and Dobrinsky will be in the lineup somehow, like you said, whether that be short second or maybe Carson's catching. But so far, the guy that's impressed me the most from my opinion of this guy in the fall versus working with him this winter, that's increased the most, has definitely been Cooper Woolen. The guy that I wasn't too familiar with going into the winter, but this guy works very hard at practice. I think that he's probably the best defensive third baseman they have right now. I don't work with him in the cage at all, so I know nothing about Cooper's at bats or how he swings in the cage or anything like that. But yeah, that's what I've seen from him defensively, right? But we have four guys here who are all going to push each other. And I think it's going to be a very exciting, battle here and to see what Mac does to open April.
Yeah, and Bernie, looking at Cooper Woolen, tell me, Bernie, what does this sound like is his problem at the plate to you? He strikes out 35% of the time and walks 40% of the time. To me, that just screams passiveness, when you're drawing, obviously walks aren't inherently bad, but when you've got a guy who's walking 40% of his at-bats, that tells you he's being a little bit too passive. And to me, the strikeouts is the same thing. I think if we can get Cooper to just be a little bit more aggressive, you could see, a lot of good things come from that with his bat, and I think he could really perform well as a hitter down the stretch. But in terms of Bentley Radford, I pulled up his numbers. He very rarely strikes out. He's got basically 4 walks to every strikeout he takes, and he's about a 10% walker and about a 2.5% strikeout guy. So never strikes out, always going to put the ball in play. For me, how much power is he going to hit for? And that's going to be the determiner of if he's on the top team and if he's going to be a contributor on that top team. So a lot of interesting situations there with that 11U Floyd infield. And then looking at the outfield, I think the outfield, we pretty much know what we're gonna get. It's probably gonna be Lucas Kloster, Ben Bonchek, and Owen Haynes. Barney, do you have any objections with that? I feel like that's probably gonna be the outfield most of the time.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah, I'm not, I don't work with the outfielders during 11U practice. I only get over there for the infielders, so I don't necessarily know if there's any big prospects in that outfield. But for me, I think it's Kloster, Bonchek, and Owen Haynes is probably going to be the outfield most of the time. And then at catcher, you've got Dom Ahern, who's going to catch a lot, and then obviously Matthew Hume, who's probably going to be the EH for the most part. But I think this 11U Floyd team, they've got a lot of pieces. They got a lot of guys who could potentially do big things for them. And then when you look at the pitching staff, I think this could turn into a real strength of this team where the pitching was super inconsistent last year. You look at this pitching staff right now, Whedon Hainline, Carson Griffith, Owen Haynes. You've got Owen Dobrinsky, who has thrown some solid innings in the past. Cooper Woolen, who, didn't necessarily pitch amazing, but pitched serviceable. That if he's your fifth or sixth guy, right, you're not too upset with that. I think this pitching staff could be a real strength to this team. I don't know if it necessarily fits in the theme of today's show, that is position battles, because I think we kind of know who's going to be there. But just talking at 11U Floyd in general, I think this pitching staff could be a real strength. So let's go ahead and move on to 13U Floyd and kind of wrap up the youth teams here. Looking at this team top to bottom, I think the biggest and most obvious battle is going to be in the outfield. I think this infield is pretty, pretty well known. I think we're going to get Caden Inman at third. We're going to get ZZ Garcia at short. And we're probably going to get Nifred Kabarkis at first. Second base we'll talk about in a minute. But I think this outfield is where you're going to see the biggest battle for this team. Bernie, looking at the outfield, you've got kind of more of the defensive guys like an Owen Weibrecht, and then you've got more of the offensive guys like a Cam Bernstein. What are you looking at here with this 13U Floyd outfield, Bernie? I know you get a chance to work with them a lot at practice, but what do you think about this 13U Floyd outfield situation this winter?
Yeah, Diego's gonna be out there somewhere. Our MVP, Diego Buccio. You figure Josh Tyler's gonna be out there a lot. So coming down to the last spot, I mean, depends what you're looking for out there. I mean, Owen Weinbrecht. I don't know if he's there yet. He's a good center fielder right now, but he has the potential to be like a game changing type defensive center fielder because this is how fast he is. If he gets a good read on a ball, he can go get any ball like that other people just can't go get.
Yeah, and let me ask you, Bernie. You know, between Josh and Diego, who I agree with you, I think they're going to be both out there for sure. Do you think that one of them can play center field every day, and would you be happy with that?
I know Kennedy has raved a lot Josh in center field. I think you're okay if Josh is your center fielder. I don't know if I'm there with Diego. I think he's more of an offensive type outfielder, but I think Josh is serviceable out there. But again, Owen Weinbrecht just has a speed that makes him a game-changing type center fielder.
Yeah, definitely. And then Bernie with the other guys like Avery, who's been working in the outfield, Cam Bernstein, maybe even Phil Lobeck. Those three guys I would say definitely are more the offensive side. What do you think about those three guys in terms of them breaking into this outfield?
Yeah, with Avery and Cam, those are two guys that you expect to be in the lineup somewhere. I know Kennedy's going to toy with the idea of maybe putting Cam or Avery back at second, maybe. There's a lot of different options there. One of those guys can pitch a decent amount. But another guy that we have not talked about at all, Nick Byrne, I think is going to be in that lineup somewhere. He is impressed. I know you, me, especially Kennedy with his at-bats in Winter League. Nick Byrne, a guy's been here a long time, been working hard for a real long time. He will be in the lineup somewhere. I don't know if it's in the outfield. He's not as, good out there as maybe like a Josh or Diego. But even if it's at EH, Nick Byrne's going to be in that lineup somewhere, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Bernie, when you start to go through these names, it's a crowded, not only outfield, but lineup. I mean, I feel like there's more than 10 names here that we expect to be in the lineup somewhere. Where all these guys going to play, I think is going to be interesting to see. And then when you look at the kind of second base conversation, look, I mean, maybe I'm wrong to assume this, but I think for the most part, Judd is going to catch a lot of the innings, and Garrett's going to be predominantly the EH. Obviously, Garrett's going to catch some, but I think predominantly Garrett's probably your EH. So every other guy we name is going to have to play the field somewhere most of the time. And then when you look at second base, like you mentioned, Bernie, Cam and Avery maybe swing back to the infield. Paxton LaPlante, when he, like kind of Trevor Anderson, he plays another sport in the fall, so he's kind of inconsistent with how often he's there in the fall, but that may not be as big a problem in the spring. And then you've got these two up-and-comers like Gio Palucci and Georgie Buhazen, who have both, I would say, given reason to be considered. Georgie Buhazen's played an unbelievable defensive second base in the BWL, and Gio Palucci has shown moments that he looks like he can hit with the best of them. So Bernie, give me your thoughts on second base, and then just give me your thoughts on this lineup as a whole, because to me, there's more than 10 names here that deserve a spot in the lineup. What do you think about this lineup as a whole, and what do you think about second base?
Yeah, second base, you can't go wrong here, I feel like. Gio's a good hitter. Georgie's played amazing defensively in Winter League. Like, cannot overstate the word amazing. He's played amazing there. Kenny's a big fan of his attitude, what he brings to the team off the field. And then Avery and Cam could also play there, right? Those two guys that we expect. You just kind of hear their name, you're like, yeah, they'll be in the lineup on opening day. Like I said, with Garrett being at EH, there's definitely more than 10 names here. I'm reading them off my mind. There's definitely more than 10 names that we've mentioned
Yeah, I was gonna go ahead
in
and
this
run through them,
lineup.
Bernie, and have you count.
But I mean, Diego, just in the outfield alone, Diego, Weinbrecht, Tallier, Nick Byrne, Phil Lobeck. That's 5 right there. Cam, Avery, that's 7 right there. Just in the outfield conversation, not to mention ZZ Garcia, Caden Newman, Judd Levy, Garrett Knight, Georgie, Gio. I mean, we're way over 10 at this point. So I think there's some tough decisions have to be made at the start of at the start of April.
Yeah, I count 15 guys, Bernie, who I think have a stake to this lineup. Maybe Georgie and Gio, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Maybe there are more bench options. That would put it down to 13. Maybe Owen Wybrecht is not quite ready to hit every day. That puts it down to 12. But even then, I mean, who else do you take out of this lineup from 12? This lineup is super, super deep. The pitching staff, I think, is going to be much improved going next season. I mean, Avery McNicholas looked fantastic in his last pitching outing. Obviously, you got ZZ, Caden, and Cam at the top, and then Josh Tallier. I mean, that's 5 guys right there who are all, I think, going to be very solid pitchers. And not to mention some guys who've been working on the side, like an Owen Wybrecht, like a Nyfrika Barkis who could step up and get innings as well. So I think this team is going to be sneakily one of the deepest rosters in the Bears going into next season. And I think it's going to be super competitive down the stretch here between who wins these jobs for that team. So very, very interested to see how 13U Floyd ends up shaking out. Let's go ahead and move on to the Dalton roster. I'm going to skip 15U Floyd for now. To me, this Dalton roster, we always talk about how it's pretty much, the same core of players every single year, when you're looking up and down this lineup. But I do think there's some interesting position battles going on here. Because obviously, I mean, if I read these names to you, Bernie, Tegan Kreitler, Jack Dalton, Brody Cavett, Santiago Story, and Brady Schmidt. That's already 5 guys between second, short, and third that somebody's going to be left out there. And then in the outfield, Jackson Dormeyer, Tyler Hall, Ben Lillard, guys like Elijah Underwood, Jack Roberts when he's not catching. That's a pretty crowded outfield. So I think this team is a little bit more crowded than maybe you would think. But the big battle I want to talk about, Bernie, is our number 6 prospect in the Bears, Brady Schmidt. Where does he find his way consistently in this lineup? Because I don't know. I know you're not typically there for 18U BWL, Bernie, but Brady has played very, very well. He's taken at bats off, guys like Mac Floyd and Brady Heck, some of the best pitchers in the Bears, holding his own and playing fantastic defense. Bernie, is there a path here with Jack Teagan, Santi, Brody Caveton, and guys like that? Is there a path here for Brady Schmidt to get more at bats? How do you think he finds his way into this Dalton lineup?
Yeah, it's hard to say that there's an immediate path for Brady to be a full-time starter with that Dalton team. That lineup's just so stacked, that infield. So those 3 guys right there are, all top hitters in the Bears organization. But definitely, right, all 3 of those guys, one thing they have in common is they all pitch. So if Brady can be a little flexible in the infield, find himself in the lineup, at least 3 games a week, those 3 guys pitching, that could eventually lead to him being a full-time starter, somewhere in that field.
Yeah, I think that Ike has really, liked this guy. I think this is probably in terms of a rookie who joined the Bears, this is probably the guy that Ike's most believed in since Jack Roberts. And I think you could even argue that Ike believes more in Brady Schmidt at this point in his career than he even believed in Jack Roberts at this point in his career. So I think that this guy is going to force his way into the lineup at some point. It's tough to see the path. Like you said, Bernie, obviously he's going to get some opportunities when guys are pitching. But yeah, I think he's definitely going to be inevitable in the lineup at some point. So very, very excited to see that shake out. Okay, let's go ahead and tackle 15U Floyd. This team's interesting because similar to 13U Floyd, I think you got some guys in this lineup who are just definitely going to be in it. But you've also got a lot of guys who are looking for more at bats. It's like, it's one of those things that everybody talks about trying to get guys more at bats, but for somebody to get more at bats, somebody's got to get less. And I'll read off some names here, Bernie, and you tell me if you agree. These guys, in my opinion, are just going to be starters opening day. Ben Combs, Andrew Willeret, Ivan Saxon, Landon Nickerson, Wes Brody, and Wyatt Poore. I think those 6 are guaranteed to be in the lineup opening day and get their 3 to 4 at bats a game. Bernie, what do you think? Do you disagree with me on those 6?
Yeah, those guys are all done in the starting lineup start of the year.
Yeah, I think so for sure. Then you look at a guy like Andrew Driscoll, who, first of all, he's having an amazing BWL season. And second of all, he is defensively a huge, huge impact for this team at shortstop. So I think that's the 7th guy in the lineup. And then, the rest of this team, you've got maybe, and I'm not exaggerating here, you've got maybe 10 to 15 guys who could potentially be in this lineup after that. Let's go ahead and start. I'll break this down into a couple guys at a time. Let's start here with a handful of guys who, are big time bats that you are looking to find at bats for. And let's start with Evan Little, Matthew Bender, and Kobe Kennedy. Bernie, these 3 guys, all huge power potential with the bat. Defensively, Evan and Kobe play first, which obviously Landon Nickerson plays, and then Matt Bender's more of a second or third baseman. Again, Wes and Brody and Bing Holmes play there. So, Bernie, what's the path for these 3 guys, these big bats, to potentially get in this lineup? And if you had to pick one of the 3 that you think is most likely to lead the 3 in at bats on the top team, who would you say it is?
Yeah, it's tough because I think where 15 Floyd's especially different from a lot of our teams is the guys you just named off are not the top pitchers. Ben Combs, Landon Nickerson, and Brody are not 3 guys that take the mound for 15 Floyd very often, right? They have big guys like Logan Eckert and all those guys. So it's tough to get these guys in the lineup. But, if you're forcing me to pick one of these 3 guys, because, look, I think it's just whoever starts the season the hottest is going to get the first shot at it. But between these 3 guys, I would probably say Bender because I think he might have had the most at-bats on the team last year. But like I said, to me, it's a toss-up between those 3, and it'll just be how they start the season.
That's interesting, Bernie. That's not the guy I thought you were going to pick. And Matt Bender certainly has a lot of potential. Definitely in terms of pure power. I think he's got probably the second most potential of these 3 guys. Evan Little, it's hard to deny his power potential. But I think when you're looking at, to me, Bernie, the favorite between these 3 might have to be Kobe Kennedy. He had arguably the best season of the 3. I think it's fair to say Kobe was a monster on that Driscoll team. And when he came up on the last weekend of the season, he played really, really well in that weekend with the top team. I think this guy has earned a shot. And I think when you're talking about the first crack at it, I think Kobe probably gets the first crack at it before Evan Little or Matt Bender. Obviously, I have no information. This is me. This is my opinion. It has nothing to do with what I've heard from Rob. I haven't talked to Rob about any of this. So this is just my opinion. I think Kobe probably deserves the first crack at it there, and we'll see from there. But those are just the first 3 names that I want to talk about, Bernie. Let's talk about this next group of 3. These 3 are guys who are young in terms of their career with the Bears. They have all shown a lot of potential, but maybe haven't put quite everything together offensively, at least on the top team. And these 3 names, Adam Shockley, Dane Pastrana, and Braden King. I think with Shock and Dane, you're looking at outfielders, and then Braden King obviously plays mostly infield, but he could play the outfield as well. These 3 guys, Bernie, I think, I was going to say more defensive minded, but I would say, Dane maybe is a little bit more 2-way. Adam Shockley certainly had a very solid season, and BK, he had his moments at the plate. But these 3 guys, Bernie, which of these 3 do you think has the highest ceiling? And which of these 3 do you think has the highest floor, Bernie, between Adam Shockley, Braden King, and Dane Pastrana?
Yeah, the highest ceiling, guy I think here, just for hitting purposes, I think it's got to be Dane Pastrana. I think he has a combination of power and speed that's rare. That if he can put it all together, he could be a legit superstar type hitter. And the highest floor is, I think the obvious answer to Adam Shockley, just because he showed us this last year. He's going to take a good at bat every time. He'll take his walks. He's not going to strike out too often. He's going to get on base. He's going to play good defense in the outfield. He does everything well, right? Base right in every part of the game. Absolutely does well.
Yeah, and I think in terms of finding a spot, I do think the outfield is a little bit more malleable than the infield. Like you said, Bernie, Ben, um, Wes, and Landon don't pitch, so those three are going to be out there most innings. Andrew Driscoll does pitch a little bit, but you figure he's going to be at short most innings. The outfield is a little bit less clear. I think Ivan is going to play a lot of innings in left. Andrew Willer is obviously your center fielder, and I think right field. Shock played there a lot last season. I think he's probably on paper, the opening day starter. But I definitely think that's the spot in the lineup that is the most up for grabs. And yeah, I agree. I think we've seen moments from Dane without kind of the consistency. And then with Shock, we saw very consistent, solid performances, but without the big power. Shock, a 4% extra base hit percentage. It's just not going to do it if you want to be a starter on this team. The floor or the caliber of hitter you have to be to get 150 at bats on this 15 Floyd squad is going to be so high that I'm not sure Shock, with what he did last year, is going to be able to do it. He's got to get that extra base hit number up. So let's go ahead and keep going because I've got several more guys I want to talk about. This next group of three, these are the big performers on that Driscoll team who have probably earned at least a look at the top team, if not a straight up promotion. These three guys are Eric Latrina, Alex Ruppel, and Nolan Chilton. I think all three of them have shown offensive prowess. I think all three of them, while not necessarily being defensive superstars, are definitely solid defensively. They're not going to hurt you. And then all three of them can pitch as well. So you're looking at guys who can benefit the team in three different ways. Bernie, of these three guys, which do you think is the most likely to open the season with 15U Floyd? And what do you think just as a whole of Eric Latrina, Alex Ruppel, and Nolan Chilton?
Yeah, it's tough because again, you asked me to pick a favorite here. All three of these guys, I think, have bright futures here. But I think if you're looking for a guy, maybe to catch my white boy, that could be Ruppel shot. Like you said, all three of these guys pitch. But for me, a guy who I think could be on Rob's bench, maybe, who's a good defender, who I think probably, I don't have the stats in front of me, but probably had the best offensive season. He's had an amazing winter league in the B League. Got promoted to the A roster, I believe, this week. That'd be Eric Latrina. The guy that's been here for a long, long time, been working very hard. I think he had the best offensive season, and I believe in his ability to keep up that production that we've seen recently from him here in Winter League to transfer into the season.
Yeah, Eric's been a beast. Obviously, he was a beast for Driscoll this season. Hit nearly 600, which at 15U, man, that is very, very tough to do. BWL, he's been amazing. I'm excited to see going forward what he's able to do against a little bit higher caliber pitching in the A League. But yeah, like you said, Bernie, I think all three of these guys definitely have enough talent to be on this top roster. But like I said before, there's basically three openings in the lineup, and I've already named 9 guys, and I'm not done. I've got a couple more guys I want to talk about. This next group of guys, all rookies in the Bears for this past season, joined in the fall, and all three I think have shown enough potential that they deserve a look as well, and that is Lucas Colson, Gunnar Wilson, and Jude Ramirez. I think all three of these guys have their own, stake at the top roster. I think Lucas Colson is more of that consistent all around. He can hit a little bit, he can field, he can pitch, he can run, he can really do it all. Then you look at a guy like Gunnar Wilson, who definitely a little more up and down, definitely a lot, in my opinion, less consistent than Lucas Colson, but a higher ceiling than Lucas Colson. And then you got a guy in Jude Ramirez who I think's right in the middle of those two. Not quite the ceiling as Gunnar, but not quite the floor as Lucas, but a high ceiling and high floor in his own right. These three guys, Bernie, I want to know, first of all, who do you think is the highest long-term potential of these three? And then immediately, who do you think has the best chance of being on 15U Floyd next year? So who do you think's got the best chance of being on 15U Floyd this season? And who do you think is the biggest long-term potential in their Bear career?
Yeah. For who I think has the best chance of making the roster immediately, I think I'll just have to go with Gunner, just based on the fact that I think he played the most on Floyd last year out of these three by a decent amount. He had a decent amount of bats to him, I believe. Again, I don't have stats in front of me, but and then for us, a long term type thing, you know, I think anyone who's watched BBN or talked to me around the 15U, I cannot speak any higher of Lucas Colson. The work ethic that he shows in practice is just off the charts. Something that you see very rare out of so many guys, that his work ethic is just so high. But again, we talked about you just said that Gunner's probably the highest ceiling guy. I'd probably have to agree with that for a long term. I think Gunner works very hard in his own right. I see him up there all the time. I think that if Gunner can find some consistency, put it all together, so to say, that he probably does have the highest ceiling. I don't want to leave Jude out of this, but I'm just not as keen on maybe Jude Ramirez as I am the other two. I think I've worked with the other two a lot more, especially this winter.
Yeah, I'll talk on Jude a little bit. I mean, this guy, he's been on my BWL team. And I'll be honest, Bernie, I didn't really know much about him other than his stats when I drafted him, but his stats were so good, and I've seen his body that I just had to have him on my BWL team, and he's definitely lived up to the hype for me. He's been, of the guys who've just been on my B League team, has probably been the most consistent in terms of his at-bats. He's been very, very solid all around. So I think again, I don't think he has quite the ceiling as Gunner, and I don't think he has quite the consistency as Lucas Colson, but I do think he's got, in his own right, a very solid chance to be, maybe not in to open the season, but I think in some point in his Bear career, he will be a top team guy. Okay, to end it off here with this 15 Floyd team, Bernie, I'm going to give you a list of about like 5 to 7 guys, and I just want you to pick one, Bernie, who you think could be a potential 15U Floyd guy at some point next season. So here we go, a list of guys here: Alex DeMertzes, Caden Benner, Colin Sandler, Max Sandler, Ethan Portell, Jaden Coleman, Jude Blattner, and I had one more, and Will Diekman. Of those 8 guys, Bernie, which of them do you think has the highest chance to be on the Floyd roster at some point? I think all these guys are well-renowned prospects. I think there's something to like about all of them. But if you had to pick one, Bernie, who would you take here?
Yeah, if you're asking me who's going to be on the team next season, I'm looking at this 15U Floyd roster as a whole, where I could think some guys could possibly fit in, get some innings. I'd probably go with Jude Blattner, just because I know he catches. I know he's fairly new to catching, but he's gotten better at it very quickly. I think that he could snag some innings in there maybe. I still believe that Jude's a very good hitter. But don't forget about these Sandler twins, especially. I know Colin's been kind of setting the BWL landscape on fire with his hitting these past couple weeks. So I would not count them out. But my first pick would probably be Jude.
Yeah, and Bernie, I'm not sure when you left BWL this past week, but Colin had 2 more homers this week.
I
So
saw
he
the first one.
continues. Yeah, he had 2 homers in that game. So he continues to just absolutely set the world on fire in the BWL. So, and there are several guys, especially for Rob, maybe if you're playing, and this is not meant in any negative way at all, but if you're playing for an Ike Dalton team, or maybe even like Mac, I think what you do in the BWL isn't necessarily as impactful. But for Rob pays attention to what you do in the BWL. It gave Dane a shot with the top team last year. And I think Colin Sandler, if he wasn't on Rob's roster or on Rob's radar before, he's on Rob's radar now. So very, very excited to see how that plays out. And let's go ahead and finish up the show here with 18U Floyd. I saved this team for last. One, they're the oldest, and 2, I think there's maybe the least to talk about with this team in terms of position battles. This roster, I think, is pretty straightforward. I think you kind of know who the starters are and who the role players are. But when you're looking at this team top to bottom, I would say one guy, Bernie, that I'm not sure. In fact, let me go ahead and sort here by the last 2 months of the season. I'm not sure how much this guy played toward the end, but I know he's been very much impressing me both in BWL, and I know at the end of the season he was pretty hot, and that's Brady Heck. He's a guy who, yeah, I mean, if you look at he played, he's around the middle of the pack in terms of at bats. But Brady Heck and Clayton Kyra, for that matter, have both were kind of in the middle of the pack. They were still getting subbed out. I think these 2 guys have both played really well in the BWL. And when you're looking at maybe taking guys' jobs, I think those 2 maybe have the ceiling to go ahead and move up the chain a little bit. But when it comes to this team, Bernie, I think, the conversation always has been who is kind of there besides Mac and Brennan. But I even want to go a little bit further than that. You got Mac, Brennan, you got Elliott and Reese, so I think you know what you're going to get from them. You got Rose Selby. Of this next group of guys, Bernie, who do you think has the highest ceiling in terms of what they can do to really help this 18U Floyd team, um, you know, really help that top five? In this group, Fred Smith, Andrew Eaglekin, the Birnstill guys, Brady Heck, Clayton Kyera, and Adam Tobias. Of those five guys, Bernie, who do you think is the highest ceiling to really help that top five?
Yeah, just talking about strictly ceiling, it's hard not to pick Clayton Kyera. We saw this guy go on some runs, at the end of last summer, early fall, maybe even, where he hit, 2 home runs a weekend. The amount of power this guy has. Again, another guy that's going to strike out a decent amount, but you get a lot of power that goes along with that, right? Maybe if you can cut down the strikeouts, move the power or keep the power the same, decrease strikeouts a little bit. I know that's a lot easier said than done, but if you can find a little bit of consistency, definitely the highest ceiling guy, that could be, one of just a top hitter along with the rest of those guys.
Yeah, and Clayton, his strikeout rate, it's 22.6%, which is certainly maybe a little bit higher than the superstar caliber players. What was Brennan's? Yeah, so Brennan's was 15.6. I think Clayton's can get a strikeout rate closer to 15%, than 25. I think you're looking at, his extra base hit rate is, top five on the team. So he's already hitting extra base hits at the good level. He walks his fair share. If he can just get that strikeout rate a little bit closer to 15%, I think you could see a huge step forward for Clayton Kyera this year. But I mean, 9 doubles, 6 homers. It's hard to complain with what Clayton did last year. I think he's in a great position to really benefit this team. So that is kind of all of the varsity teams and the position battles going into this winter. Bernie, I'll go first because I didn't prepare you with this question. But when it comes to this winter, 2024, whether it's a player or a situation or one of the position battles we talked about, what is the one thing you're most interested to see how it develops over the course of the winter? Like I said, I'll go first here, and I think I gotta go with Joey Burgess. I think he is the most interesting player for me in terms of what role he's going to have for this 14U Floyd team this season. Is he going to be a guy, because we've had number one prospects in the past who've turned into superstars like ZZ Garcia. And then we've had number one prospects who've turned into, solid role players, and there's nothing wrong with being a role player. But which kind of side of the coin is Joey Burgess going to fall into? I personally believe he's got the ceiling to be one of the best hitters in the Bears, one of the best power sources in the Bears. But I want to see how far is his defense going to come behind the plate and in the outfield. And I want to know, is his bat going to be closer to the top 5 of the order or closer to the bottom 5 of the order? It, to me, is what's most interesting. Bernie, for you, what is the most interesting thing you're looking at in winter training camp this year?
Yeah, I don't think I would have said this, maybe before, honestly, the show happened. But just looking through some of these different ages, right? We named off a ton of guys at 50 who could be a starting lineup, but not necessarily a lot of guys that I would have said, yes, those guys are a starting lineup day one. We talked about 13U, and there was probably at least 11, 12 guys that I was like, I heard their name, and I was like, yes, that guy is going to be a starting lineup come spring. So I think that's definitely most interesting for me now, just seeing which, 9 or 10 of those guys gets picked to be that starting lineup come opening day.
Yeah, and obviously the lineup's going to fluctuate, but I agree, Bernie. As I was preparing for this show, I was like, wow, look how many names there are on this 13 Floyd team. I didn't realize how deep they are. And I think the question is more of, who's going to step up as maybe that third superstar? I think we all kind of hope it's going to be Garrett. I think we've seen it from Knifrey, so those are maybe the front runners, but there's a lot of different guys here who could be that guy. When you're looking at the top 5 of this order, it's not quite as extreme as like Mac and Brennan. Like ZZ and Diego are both elite. And I hope Garrett and Knifrey can kind of be that duo to complement Diego and ZZ. But there's a lot of names here that you got to think of those 12 to 15 guys, if you count like the Gio, Georgie, and Owen. Of those 12 to 15 guys, you got to think you're going to find 6, 7, 8 really, really good hitters. So, yeah, I agree, Bernie. I think that is going to be really fun to keep track of over the course of this offseason. But That's going to do it for this episode of BBN After Dark. Next week, we will have another episode of BBN After Dark, taking on some of the biggest storylines from the BWL and also looking at some of the top prospects and how we see them fitting into their teams this season. But that's going to do it for this episode of the BBN After Dark. Bernie, thanks for joining me. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to y'all next week.